There are moments in life that strip away every title, every credential, and every carefully constructed public image, leaving behind only the raw truth of who you really are. For Hoda Kotb, that moment came not in a studio under bright lights, but in the quiet hours of a February morning when her phone rang and the world she had carefully stepped away from came rushing back with full force. At 61 years old, after spending more than 2 decades building one of the most recognizable careers in American morning television, Hoda had made a deliberate and deeply personal choice to walk away from the anchor desk. She had traded the 4 a.m. alarm clocks for school drop-offs, swapped the teleprompter for bedtime stories, and exchanged the chaos of live television for the slower, sweeter rhythm of motherhood. It was a decision she had not made lightly, and it was one she had defended publicly with the kind of quiet conviction that only comes from someone who has done the hard inner work of knowing exactly what she values most. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. And when the crisis arrived, Hoda Kotb did not hesitate, did not calculate, and did not weigh the professional cost against the personal sacrifice. She simply showed up, because that is what you do for family. To understand why Hoda's return to the Today Show in February 2026 meant so much, you first have to understand what she had walked away from and why. When she announced her departure in September 2024, she was not running from something. She was running towards something far more important. 26 years at NBC is not just a career, it is a life. It is thousands of mornings spent sitting across from world leaders, celebrities, grieving families, and ordinary people with extraordinary stories. It is a relationship with the American public that is built cup of coffee at a time, one Tuesday morning after another, until the faces on that screen become as familiar as neighbors. Hoda had earned every single one of those years. She had survived cancer, navigated personal heartbreak, adopted 2 daughters as a single mother, and built a brand of warmth and authenticity that television rarely produces organically. People did not just watch Hoda Kotb. They trusted her. There is a meaningful difference between those two things, and she understood it better than almost anyone in her industry. When she turned 60 and began seriously considering life beyond the anchor desk, her reasoning was simple and profound. Her youngest daughter, Hope, had ongoing health needs that required a level of daily presence that a demanding television schedule simply could not accommodate. Hoda wanted to be the one at the breakfast table every morning. She wanted to be the familiar face at school pickup, not the famous face on the television screen. She launched a new company, began working on a wellness project, and by all accounts, settled into her new life in Westchester with genuine contentment. She was not performing happiness for an audience. She was actually living it. That is what makes her decision to come back so powerful. She was not bored. She was not restless. She was not looking for a reason to return to the spotlight. She gave all of that up because her friend needed her. The news broke with the kind of quiet devastation that only a missing person case can produce. In the early days of February 2026, Savannah Guthrie's mother, Nancy, disappeared from her home in Tucson, Arizona. For anyone who has followed Savannah's career over the years, the name Nancy Guthrie carries enormous weight. Savannah has spoken about her mother with a reverence that goes beyond simple admiration. Nancy is, in Savannah's own words, someone of ironclad strength, a woman who was widowed in her 40s with 3 children to raise and who chose to meet that tragedy not with grief and surrender, but with action and faith. Nancy Guthrie raised her children in Tucson after years of living abroad, grounding them in values of hard work, honesty, and resilience. She worked at the University of Arizona to put her children through college. She attended church faithfully. She lived alone in her 80s, independently and on her own terms, even while managing a heart condition that required daily medication. She was, by every account, a woman of extraordinary character, precisely the kind of person who shapes their children so completely that you can see the mother in everything the daughter does. When Nancy went missing, Savannah left the Today Show immediately to fly to Arizona and work alongside law enforcement officials in the search. The anchor chair she left behind was not just empty in a logistical sense. It was empty in a way that the entire staff and viewing audience could feel. The Today Show is built, in large part, on the chemistry and continuity of the people who sit at that desk. Losing Savannah during an active family crisis was not just a scheduling challenge. It was an emotional wound for an entire broadcast family. When Hoda Kotb walked back into Studio 1A in early February 2026, she was not making a career move. She was making a statement about loyalty that no press release or carefully worded announcement could have communicated more clearly. She was stepping back into one of the most demanding jobs in television, giving up the peaceful morning routine she had built, and returning to a schedule that her body and mind had only recently been freed from, all because her closest friend was sitting in a hotel room in Arizona, waiting for news about her mother. The staff reportedly responded to her return with a wave of relief that went beyond the practical. Yes, having an experienced anchor fill the seat was helpful. But having Hoda Kotb specifically fill that seat meant something different entirely. It meant that the show's own stated values, family, loyalty, showing up, were not simply advertising language. They were real. Hoda was transparent about her motivations from the moment she returned. She spoke on air about the bond she shares with Savannah, tracing it back not to their years as co-anchors but to an earlier, quieter chapter when they were simply two women sharing an office and figuring out their place in a demanding industry. That foundation, built on small confidences and genuine mutual respect, had grown over the years into something that neither fame nor contract negotiations nor the inevitable pressures of network television had been able to erode. She reminded viewers of the specific moment that had cemented that bond in a way that all the shared professional successes never quite could. When Hoda's daughter Hope was hospitalized in 2023, Savannah did not send flowers or a text message. She showed up in person. She was the first person through that hospital door. For Hoda, that single act of showing up became the entire definition of what their friendship means. Everything she has done since, including returning to a job she had already said goodbye to, flows directly from that memory. As the search for Nancy Guthrie stretched across days and then into weeks, the emotional toll on Savannah became visible in ways that only someone who truly knows her could fully appreciate. To the general viewing public, Savannah presented herself with the kind of composed, measured professionalism that has defined her career. She spoke clearly. She provided updates. She held press conferences and released carefully worded statements. She looked, from a distance, like a woman who was handling an impossible situation with grace. But Hoda, watching from both the anchor desk and through private conversations, could see what the cameras could not. She could see the particular exhaustion that comes not from a lack of sleep but from the sustained effort of holding yourself together when every instinct in your body is telling you to fall apart. She could see the way Savannah's natural discipline, the same quality that had taken her from a law degree to the top of morning television, was being turned inward in ways that were not necessarily healthy or sustainable. The investigation itself provided no easy comfort. The evidence that emerged from Nancy's home painted a disturbing picture of a carefully planned crime rather than a random act of opportunism. The discovery of blood on the porch, the disconnected doorbell camera, the ransom communication sent to media outlets, each new detail added another layer of complexity to an already devastating situation. The demand for millions of dollars in cryptocurrency, paired with a complete absence of any proof that Nancy was alive and receiving her heart medication, created a psychological pressure that law enforcement officials described as deliberately designed to destabilize the family. Through all of it, Savannah stood firm in public. And through all of it, Hoda quietly worked to make sure her friend knew she did not have to stand alone. One of the most quietly powerful things Hoda did during this period was almost invisible in its simplicity. She wore a yellow ribbon. She placed yellow flowers on the anchor desk. She began her broadcast with references to the ongoing search and the community support that was growing around the Guthrie family. To a casual viewer, these might have seemed like small gestures, the kind of thing a news organization does when one of its own is facing difficulty. But the significance ran much deeper. Hoda was making a deliberate choice to keep Nancy Guthrie's face and story at the forefront of national conversation during a period when the relentless pace of the news cycle threatened to push the story aside in favor of fresher headlines. She understood something essential about the psychology of media coverage and public attention. The moment a story stops feeling urgent, it stops generating the kind of community pressure that can actually move an investigation forward. By keeping the yellow ribbon visible, by flooding the studio with the color of hope and solidarity, by using her own considerable social media platform to share personal photographs of Nancy and Savannah in their private, unguarded moments, Hoda was doing something that no official press conference or law enforcement update could accomplish. She was making Nancy Guthrie feel like a neighbor to millions of people who had never met her. She was making it personal for an entire country. The response from viewers was remarkable. People across the country began tying yellow ribbons to trees in front of their homes. Communities far removed from Tucson organized vigils. The kind of collective, sustained public attention that Hoda was working to generate is genuinely difficult to manufacture. It requires people to feel a real emotional connection to the story rather than simply being informed of the facts. Hoda Kotb, by drawing on the full depth of her authentic relationship with Savannah and her genuine anguish over Nancy's disappearance, created that connection. At 61, Hoda Kotb has accumulated enough life experience to know the difference between relationships that exist because of circumstance and relationships that reveal themselves in moments of crisis. Her friendship with Savannah Guthrie is, without question, the latter category. They came up together in an industry that can be extraordinarily competitive and surprisingly isolating, particularly for women trying to build careers at the highest levels while also building families and lives that have meaning outside of work. They shared the particular vulnerability of being in the public eye during their most personal struggles, Hoda's health challenges, her journey to motherhood, her very public romantic life and its eventual ending. Savannah's own path through marriage, motherhood, and the relentless demands of anchoring the most-watched morning program in America came with its own private costs. What Hoda has demonstrated through her actions in February 2026 is that genuine friendship is not measured in grand gestures made under easy circumstances. It is measured in what you are willing to sacrifice when the circumstances are hard. She gave up the retirement she had earned and the daily peace she had found. She went back to the schedule that had demanded so much of her body and spirit for over 2 decades. She sat at that desk and held the weight of the show and the weight of her friend's crisis simultaneously, maintaining the calm and warmth that her audience expected while carrying privately the fear and grief that any honest person would feel in her position. She did all of this not because it was professionally strategic or publicly admirable. She did it because Savannah was her person, and when your person needs you, you go. There is something specific and significant about this chapter of Hoda's life that makes her voice carry a particular kind of authority. At 61, she has moved beyond the stage of life where public image and professional positioning consume the majority of your energy and attention. She has done the difficult work of deciding what actually matters and has made choices, including the choice to step away from one of the most coveted seats in television, that reflect those values with integrity. When she speaks about friendship and loyalty and the meaning of showing up for the people you love, she is not performing a version of herself that she thinks will be well received. She is speaking from a place of hard-won clarity about what a life well-lived actually looks like. That is why her words carry weight. That is why her return to the Today Show meant something beyond the logistics of filling an empty anchor chair. She has also, through this experience, offered something valuable to the millions of people who have watched her navigate both her departure and her return. She has demonstrated